Girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, each one she passes goes, ah. When she walks, it's like a samba that sways so cool and sways so gently, that when she passes, each one she passes goes, ah. Oh, but he watches so sadly. How can he tell her he loves her? Him? Yes, he will give his heart gladly. But each day that she walks out to sea, she looks straight ahead, not at him. Down. Okay, enough of that. Hey Google, stop. Hey Google, stop. Hi everybody. Welcome to Aunty Anya's Reading Corner. I'm your delightful host, Andrea. I heard of that, thought of that song today. I absolutely love it. It's just, Stan Getz is just, he's the shit. I love him. Phil, hi hun. Good to see you too. Sorry I had to bail last night. I was all ready to go. And, well, it's just, I'm doing rentals like I've mentioned a few times. I've got 5 vacancies. Well, now I only have 3. I had a good day today. So I had this this lovely couple lined up, and I worked all weekend tirelessly to pull the deal together and negotiating back and forth on rent rates and with the owner. Finally got it all squared away. They were all happy and excited coming last night, and then at the last minute they were like, oh, we just heard from this other place and we were approved and now we're not sure and all this. And you know what, it happens. I was like, listen, I don't want you to take it if you don't want it, but I really hate that you called me 10 minutes before you're supposed to be here to bail on me. And I said, but that's fine. Go and think about it and rest on it. I said, but just be cautious because not all landlords are as awesome as me. And that's just the truth. Like, I heard this horrible story on the radio the other day that landlords, so there's at least one landlord, if not many, or at least a few downtown, are, because the rent increase freeze did happen. And so all rent increases that have been affected in the next 3-4 months, anything that's been delivered is frozen. It's not eliminated. It's just put on hold basically until at least July. Probably longer if this COVID thing doesn't get better. So some landlords downtown have decided to jack up their rental rates or their parking rates like 200 to 300%, because that's the one thing they can do. Legally, they can do that, by the way, if anyone's wondering. They can put it up to whatever the hell they want as long as they give you 1 month's notice, because that's not part of the rental agreement unless it's on your rental agreement contract, in which case you do have an argument and RTV would probably find in your favor. But just in case that happens to somebody, let me know. I'll be more than happy to coach you on it. I would never do that to one of my tenants. Anyway, at any rate, the good news is they came back today and said, oh shit, I forgot to mute all my stuff. So you might get some texts and stuff. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, they came back today and said, you know what? We saw the other unit, but something keeps drawing us back to you. Her words. I was like, because I'm awesome. And she's like, yeah, that's probably it. I said, okay. So they came and they signed and they dropped off their deposit. I was super stoked. Meanwhile, I did another showing, this other great couple. And I was like, right, get me the app. Did it, fired it in, did their background checks, got it pre-approved. So now I've got 2 rented and I'm really, really happy. So raise your glass, everybody. Here's to winning. Cheers. I earned that. Okay. What else can I say? Oh, special shout out to my niece, Summer. It was her 19th birthday yesterday. She's now legal drinking age. One of us. One of us. Happy birthday, Summer. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I love you so much. You know how much I love you. And I hope you had a spectacular day. What else can I mention? Christmas is 38 days away, just in case anybody's wondering. So, get out there and pre-shop. I don't know. You know what? I'm actually really happy about it this year because normally I dread the shopping and all that. I usually get everybody a bottle of wine and some scratch and wins because I'm like, I can't fucking be bothered. But this year we're doing the Secret Santa thing, so I'm really stoked about that. I know who I pulled, and I already put my wish list in. It makes it fun, it makes it easy, and it cuts down the amount of time we have to spend inside stores. So I think it's actually the healthy choice. Andrea approved. That's pretty much it. I'm not going to waste any more time. It's 3:39, 7:39. I want to get a couple of chapters in before I have to wrap it up. So thank you for joining me as usual. Let's see here. We are, oh yeah, they just discussed their big plan. And which I believe we already know that they are going to visit the Queen. I'm going to do my best English accent that I can when she comes into play. So here we go with the BFG by Roald Dahl, chapter called Journey to London. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight as the big friendly giant went galloping across it. Sophie, still wearing only her nightie, was reclining comfortably in a crevice of the BFG's right ear. She was actually in the outer rim of the ear, near the top, where the edge of the ear folds over. And this folding over a bit made a sort of roof for her and gave her wonderful protection against the rushing wind. What's more, she was lying on the skin that was soft and warm, almost velvety. Nobody, she told herself, had ever traveled in greater comfort. Sophie peeped over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of giant country go whizzing by. They were certainly moving fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though there were rockets in his toes, and each stride he took lifted him about 100 feet into the air. But he had not yet gone into that whizzing top gear of his, when the ground became blurred by speed, and the wind howled, and his feet just didn't seem to touch anything but air. That would come later. Sophie had not slept for a long time. She was very tired. She was also warm and comfortable. She dozed off. She didn't know how long she had slept, but when she woke up again and looked out over the edge of the ear, the landscape had changed completely. They were in green country now, with mountains and forests. It was still dark, but the moon was shining as brightly as ever. Suddenly, and without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharply to the left. "Hey, George. Good to see you, babe." Here's a blast from the past. Emily, George is here, and Phil. "Look quick, over there," he said, pointing his long trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction he was pointing. Through the murky darkness, all she saw at first was a great cloud of dust about 300 yards away. "Those is the other giants all galloping back home after their guzzle," the BFG said. Then Sophie saw them. In the light of the moon, she saw all 9 of those monstrous, half-naked brutes thundering across the landscape together. They were galloping in a pack, their necks craned forward, their arms bent at the elbows, and, worst of all, their stomachs bulging. The strides they took were incredible. Their speed was unbelievable. Their feet pounded and thundered on the ground and left a great sheet of dust behind them. But in 10 seconds, they were gone. "A lot of those girlsies and boysies is no longer sleeping in their beds tonight," the BFG said. Sophie felt quite ill. But this grim encounter made her more than ever determined to go through with their mission. Must have been about an hour or so later that the BFG began to slow his pace. "We is in England now," he said suddenly. Sorry, I had to clear my throat there. Dark though it was, Sophie could see that they were in a country of green fields with neat hedges in between the fields. There were hills with trees all over them, and occasionally there were roads with the lights of cars moving along. Each time they came to a road, the BFG was over it and away, and no motorist could possibly have seen anything except a quick black shadow flashing overhead. All at once, a curious orangey-colored glow appeared in the night sky ahead of them. "We is coming close to London," the BFG said. He slowed to a trot. He began looking around cautiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides, but there were still no lights in their windows. It was too early for anyone to be getting up just yet. "Oh, someone's bound to see us," Sophie said. "Never as they seeing me," the BFG said confidently. And you is forgetting that I is doing this sort of thing for years and years and years. No human being is ever catching even the smallest wink of me. I did, Sophie whispered. Ah, he said, yes, but you was the very first. During the next half hour, things moved so swiftly and so silently that Sophie, crouching in the giant's ear, was unable to understand exactly what was going on. They were in the streets. There were houses everywhere. Sometimes there were shops. There were bright lamps in the streets. There were quite a few people about, and there were cars with lights on. But nobody ever noticed the BFG. It was impossible to understand quite how he did it. There was a kind of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt into the shadows. He would glide. That was the only word to describe his way of moving. He would glide noiselessly from one dark place to another, always moving, always gliding forward through the streets of London, his black cloak blending with the shadows of the night. It's quite possible that one or two late-night wanderers might have thought that they saw a tall black shadow skimming swiftly down a murky side street. But even if they had, they would never have believed their own eyes. They would have dismissed it as an illusion and blamed themselves for seeing things that weren't there. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There was a road running through it and a lake. There were no people in this place, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they had set out from his cave many hours before. What's the matter? Sophie whispered in her under-the-breath voice. Oh, I is in a bit of a puddle, he said. You're doing marvelously, Sophie whispered. No, I isn't, he said. I is now completely boggled. I is lost. But why? Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures. No, don't be silly, Sophie whispered. This is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where we are. Oh, you is joking. I'm not. I swear I'm not. We're almost there. You mean we is nearly at the Queen's Palace? Cried the BFG. It's just across the road, Sophie whispered. This is where I take over. Which way? The BFG said. Straight ahead. The BFG trotted forward through the deserted park. Now stop. The BFG stopped. You see that huge roundabout ahead of us, just outside the park? Sophie whispered. I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner. Even now, when it was still an hour before dawn, there was quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park Corner. Then Sophie whispered, in the middle of the roundabout, there was an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse and a rider on top of it. Can you see that? The BFG peered through the trees. I is seeing it, he said. Do you think that if you took a very fast run at it, you could jump clear over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch, and over the horse and rider, and land on the pavement on the other side? Easy, the BFG said. You're sure? You're absolutely sure? I promise, the BFG said. Whatever you do, you mustn't land in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. Don't get me flussed, the BFG said. To me, that is a snitchy little jump. There's not a thingling-ding about it. Then go, Sophie whispered. The BFG broke into a full gallop. He went scorching across the park, and just before he reached the railings that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew high over the Hyde Park Corner and landed as softly as a cat on the pavement on the other side. Well done, whispered Sophie. Now quick, over that wall. Directly in front of them, bordering the pavement, there was a brick wall with fearsome-looking spikes all along the top of it. A swift crouch, a little leap, and the BFG was over it. We're there, Sophie whispered excitedly. We're in the Queen's back garden. Hang on, get my whistle. Hey, Adele. Nice to see you, babe. I didn't see you jump in there. Ah, right. You notice I'm not suffering a straw tonight. I decided just to use my lips. Okay. the palace. I have to keep clearing my throat because I get really tired of this time of night and I haven't eaten yet, so my body's just like shutting down. But I'm excited because these are pretty fun chapters, so stick with me. The palace. By gumdrops, whispered the big friendly giant. It really is it. There's the palace, Sophie whispered back. Not more than 100 yards away, through the tall trees in the garden, across the mown lawns and the tidy flower beds, the massive shape of the palace itself loomed through the darkness. It was made of whitish stone. The sheer size of it staggered the BFG. But this place is having 100 bedrooms at least, he said. Oh, easily, I should think, Sophie whispered. Well, then I is boggled, the BFG said. How was I possibly finding that one where the queen is sleeping? Let's go a bit closer and have a look, Sophie said. The BFG glided forward among the trees. Suddenly he stopped dead. The great ear in which Sophie was sitting began to swivel around. Hey, Sophie whispered, you're going to tip me out. Shh, the BFG whispered back. I is hearing something. He stopped behind a clump of bushes. He waited. The ear was still swinging this way and that. Sophie had to hang on tight to the side of it to save herself from tumbling out. The BFG pointed through a gap in the bushes, and there, not more than 50 yards away, she saw a man padding softly across the lawn. He had a guard dog with him on a leash. The BFG stayed as still as a stone. So did Sophie. The man and the dog walked on and disappeared into the darkness. You was telling me that they had no soldiers in the back garden, the BFG whispered. Well, he wasn't a soldier, Sophie whispered. He was some sort of a watchman. We'll just have to be careful. Oh, I is not too worried, the BFG said. These waxy big ears of mine is picking up even the noise of a man breathing the other side of this garden. How much longer before it begins to get light? Sophie whispered. Very short, the BFG said. We must go pell-mell for leather now. He glided forward through the vast garden, and once again Sophie noticed how he seemed to melt into the shadows wherever he went. His feet made no sound at all, even when he was walking on gravel. Suddenly, they were right up close against the back wall of the great palace. The BFG's head was level with the upper windows, one flight up, and Sophie, sitting in his ear, had the same view. In all the windows on that floor, the curtains seemed to be drawn. There were no lights showing anywhere. In the distance, they could hear the muted sound of traffic going round Hyde Park Corner. The BFG stopped and put his other ear, the one Sophie wasn't sitting in, close to the first window. Nope, he whispered. What are you listening for? Sophie answered back. For breathing, the BFG whispered. I is able to tell if it is a man, human being, or a lady by the breathing voice. We has a man in there, snortling a little bit too. He glided on, flattening his tall, thin, black-cloaked body against the side of the building. He came to the next window. He listened. No, he whispered. He moved on. This room is too empty, he whispered. He listened in at several more windows, but at each one he shook his head and moved on. When he came to the window in the very center of the palace, he listened, but did not move on. Ho, ho, he whispered. We has a lady sleeping in here. Sophie felt a little quiver go running down her spine. But who? She whispered back. The BFG put a finger to his lips for silence. He reached up through the open window and parted the curtains ever so slightly. The orange glow from the night sky over London crept into the room and cast a glimmer of light on its walls. It was a large room, a lovely room. Rich carpet, gilded chairs, a dressing table, a bed, and on the pillow of the bed lay the head of a sleeping woman. Sophie suddenly found herself looking at a face she had seen on stamps and coins and the newspapers all her life. For a few seconds, she was speechless. Is that her? The BFG whispered. Yes, Sophie whispered back. The BFG wasted no time. First, and very carefully, he started to raise the lower half of the large window. The BFG was an expert on windows. He had opened thousands of them over the years to blow his dreams into children's bedrooms. Some windows got stuck. Some were wobbly. Some creaked. He was pleased to find that the Queen's window slid upward like silk. He pushed up the lower half as far as it would go, so as to leave a place on the sill for Sophie to sit on. Next, he closed the crack in the curtains. Then, with finger and thumb, he lifted Sophie out of his ear and placed her on the window wedge, with her legs dangling just inside the room, but behind the curtain. "Now don't you go tip-toppling backwards," the BFG whispered. "You must always be holding on tight with both hands to the inside of the windowsill." Sophie did as he asked. It was summertime in London, and the night was not cold, but don't forget that Sophie was wearing only her thin nightie. She would have given anything for a dressing gown, not just to keep her warm, but to hide the whiteness of her nightie from watchful eyes in the garden below. The BFG was taking the glass jar from the pocket of his cloak. He unscrewed the lid. Now, very cautiously, he poured the precious dream into the wide end of his trumpet. He steered the trumpet through the curtains, far into the room, aiming it at the place where he knew the bed to be. He took a deep breath. He puffed out his cheeks and he blew. Now he was withdrawing the trumpet, sliding it out very, very carefully, like a thermometer. "Is you all right sitting there?" he whispered. "Yes," Sophie whispered. She was quite terrified, but determined not to show it. She looked down over her shoulder. The ground seemed miles away. It was a nasty drop. "Oh, how long will the dream take to work?" Sophie asked. "Oh, some take an hour," the BFG whispered back. "Some is quicker. Some is slower still. But it is sure to find her in the end." Sophie said nothing. "I is going off to wait in the garden," the BFG whispered. "When you is wanting me, just call out my name, and I is coming very, very quick." "Will you hear me?" Sophie whispered. "You is forgetting these," the BFG whispered, smiling and pointing to his great big ears. "Goodbye," Sophie whispered. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the BFG leaned forward and kissed her gently on the cheek. Sophie felt like crying. When she turned to look at him, he was already gone. I get teary about dumb shit. He simply melted away into the dark garden. Oh, I just love him. He's just such a sweetheart. When somebody like that does something sweet and gentle like that, it just makes your heart grow 10 times too big. All right. The Queen. Clear my throat for this one. No judgments now. Dawn came at last, and the rim of a yellow-colored sun rose up behind the rooftops, somewhere behind Victoria Station. A while later, Sophie felt a little of its warmth on her back and was grateful. Oh, he is the sweetest, isn't he, Em? I just love him. In the distance, she heard a church clock striking. She counted the strikes. There were 7. She found it almost impossible to believe that she, Sophie, a little orphan of no real importance in the world, was at this moment actually sitting high above the ground on the windowsill of the Queen of England's bedroom, with the Queen herself asleep in there behind the curtain not more than 5 yards away. The very idea of it was absurd. No one had ever done such a thing before. It was a terrifying thing to be doing. What would happen if the dream didn't work? No one, least of all the Queen, would believe a word of her story. It seemed possible that nobody had ever woken up to find a small child sitting behind the curtains on his or her windowsill. The Queen was bound to get a shock. Who wouldn't? With all the patience of a small girl who was something important to wait for, Sophie sat motionless on the windowsill. How much longer, she wondered. What time do queens wake up? Faint stirrings and distant sounds came to her from deep inside the belly of the palace. Then, all at once, beyond the curtains, she heard the voice of the sleeper in the bedroom. It was a lightly blurred sleep talker's voice. "Oh, no," I cried out. "No, no, don't. Oh, stop them. Don't let them do it. I can't bear it. Oh, please stop them. It's horrible. Oh, it's ghastly. No, no, no." "Oh, she's having the dream," Sophie told herself. "It must be horrid. I feel so sorry for her. Oh, but it has to be done." After that, there were a few moans. Then there was a long silence. Sophie waited. She looked over her shoulder. She was terrified that she would see the man with a dog down in the garden staring up at her. The garden was deserted. A pale summer mist hung over it like smoke. It was an enormous garden, very beautiful, with a large, full, funny-shaped lake at the far end. There was an island in the lake, and there were ducks swimming on the water. Inside the room, beyond the curtains, Sophie suddenly heard what was obviously a knock at the door. She heard the doorknob being turned. She heard someone entering the room. "Good morning, Your Majesty," a woman was saying. It was the voice of an oldish person. There was a pause and then a slight rattle of china and silver. "Will you have your tray on your bed, ma'am, or on the table?" "Oh, Mary!" I don't have fun with this. "Something awful has just happened." This was a voice Sophie had heard many times on radio and television, especially on Christmas Day. It was a very well-known voice. "Whatever is it, Mum?" "Oh, I've had the most frightful dream. It was a nightmare. It was awful." "Oh, I am sorry, Mum, but don't be distressed. You're awake now, and it will go away. It was only a dream, Mum." "Do you know what I dreamt, Mary? I dreamt that girls and boys were being snatched out of their beds at boarding schools and were being eaten by the most ghastly giants. The giants were putting their arms in through the dormitory windows and plucking the children out with their fingers. Oh, one lot from a girls' school and another from a boys' school. It was so vivid, Mary." Mary. It was so real. There was silence. Sophie waited. She was quivering with excitement. But why the silence? Why didn't the other one, the maid, why didn't she say something? "What on earth is the matter, Mary?" the famous voice was saying. There was another silence. "Mary, you've gone white as a sheet. Are you feeling ill?" There was suddenly a crash and a clatter of crockery, which could only have meant that the tray the maid was carrying had fallen out of her hands. "Oh, Barbara." "Listen, babe, I gotta do my best, you know. It keeps it more fun for me too, trust me." "Mary," the famous voice was saying rather sharply, "I think you'd better sit down at once. You look as though you were going to faint. You really mustn't take it so hard just because I've had an awful dream." That isn't the reason, Mum." The maid's voice was quivering terribly. "Then for heaven's sake, what is the reason?" "I'm very sorry about the tray, Mum." "Oh, don't worry about the tray. What on earth was it all? What was it that made you drop it? Why did you go white as a ghost all of a sudden?" "You haven't seen the papers yet, Mum, have you?" Sophie heard the rustling of a newspaper as it was being handed over. It's like the very dream you had in the night, Mum." "Oh, rubbish, Mary. Where is it?" "On the front page, Mum. It's the big headlines." "Great Scott!" cried the famous voice. 18 girls vanished mysteriously from their beds at Roddington School. 14 boys disappear from Eton. Bones are found underneath dormitory windows." Then there was a pause, punctuated by gasps from the famous voice as the newspaper article was clearly being read and digested. "Oh, how ghastly!" the famous voice cried out. "It's absolutely frightful! Bones under the windows! What can have happened? Oh, those poor children!" "But, Mum, don't you see, Mum?" "See what, Mary?" "Those children were taken away almost exactly as you dreamed it, Mum." "Not by giants, Mary." "No, Mum, but the bit about the girls and boys disappearing from their dormitories. You dreamt it so clearly, and then it actually happened. That's why I came all queer, Mum." "Myself, Mary." Something just went all black. Anyway, whatever. It gives me the shakes, Mum, when something like this happens. It really does. Well, I don't blame you, Mary. I shall get you some more breakfast, Mum, and have this mess cleared up. No, don't go, Mary. Stay here for a moment. Sophie wished she could have seen into the room, but she didn't dare touch the curtains. The famous voice began speaking again. I really did dream about those children, Mary. It was clear as crystal. I know you did, Mum. I don't know how giants got into it. That was rubbish. Shall I draw the curtains, Mum? Then we shall all feel better. It's a lovely day. Yes, please do. With a swish, the great curtains were pulled aside. The maid screamed. Sophie froze to the window ledge. The Queen, sitting up in her bed with the Times on her lap, glanced up sharply. Now it was her turn to freeze. She didn't scream as the maid had done. Queens are too self-controlled for that. She simply sat there, staring wide-eyed and white-faced at the small girl who was perched on her windowsill in a nightie. Sophie was petrified. Curiously enough, the Queen looked petrified too. One would have expected her to look surprised, as you or I would have done, had we discovered a small girl sitting on our windowsill first thing in the morning. But the Queen didn't look surprised. She looked genuinely frightened. The maid, a middle-aged woman with a funny cap on the top of her head, was the first to recover. What in the name of heaven do you think you're doing here? She shouted angrily to Sophie. Sophie looked beseechingly towards the Queen for help. The Queen was still staring at Sophie. Gaping at her would be more accurate. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were round and wide as two saucers, and the whole of that famous, rather lovely face was filled with disbelief. Now listen here, young lady. How on earth did you get into this room? The maid shouted furiously. I don't believe it, the Queen said, who was murmuring. I simply don't believe it. I'll take her out, Mum, at once, the maid was saying. No, Mary, don't do that. The Queen spoke so sharply that the maid was quite taken aback. She turned and stared at the Queen. What on earth had come over her? It looked as though she was in a state of shock. Are you all right, Mum? The maid was saying. When the Queen spoke again, it was in a strange, strangled sort of whisper. Tell me, Mary, she said. Tell me quite truthfully. Is there really a little girl sitting on my windowsill, or am I still dreaming? Oh, she's sitting there all right, Mum, as clear as daylight, but heaven only knows how she got there. Your Majesty is certainly not dreaming it at this time. But that's exactly what I did dream, the Queen cried out. I dreamt that as well. I dreamt that there would be a little girl sitting on my windowsill in her nightie, and that she would talk to me. The maid, with her hands clasped across her starched white bosom, was staring at her mistress with a look of absolute disbelief on her face. The situation was getting beyond her. She was lost. She had not been trained to cope with this kind of madness. Are you real? The Queen said to Sophie. Yes, Your Majesty, the Sophie murmured. What is your name? Sophie, Your Majesty. And how did you get up on my windowsill? No, don't answer that. Hang on a moment. I dreamt that part of it too. I dreamt that a giant put you there. He did, Your Majesty, Sophie said. Control yourself, Mary, the Queen said sharply. Then to Sophie she said, You're not serious about the giant, are you? Oh, yes, Your Majesty. He's out there in the garden right now. Is he indeed? The Queen said. The sheer absurdity of it all was helping her to regain her composure. Hey, Shelley, good to see you. Composure, where the hell was it? Sorry. So he's in the garden, is he? She said, smiling a little. He is a good giant, Your Majesty, Sophie said. You need not be frightened of him. I'm delighted to hear it, the Queen said, still smiling. He's my best friend, Your Majesty. How nice, the Queen said. Oh, he's a lovely giant, Your Majesty. Oh, I'm quite sure he is, the Queen said. But why have you and this giant come to see me? I think you have dreamed that part of it too, Your Majesty, Sophie said calmly. That pulled the Queen up short. It took the smile right from her face. She certainly had dreamed that part of it. She was remembering now how, At the end of her dream, it had said that a little girl and a big friendly giant would come and show her how to find the 9 horrible man-eating giants. But be careful, the queen told herself. Keep very calm. Because this is surely not very far from the place where madness begins. You did dream that, didn't you, Your Majesty? Sophie said. The maid was out of it now. She just stood there goggling. Yes, the queen murmured. Yes, now you come to mention it. I did. But how do you know what I dreamed? Oh, that's a long story, Your Majesty, Sophie said. Would you like me to call the big friendly giant? The queen looked at the child. The child looked straight back at the queen, her face open and quite serious. The queen simply didn't know what to make of it. Was someone pulling her leg, she wondered. Shall I call him for you? Sophie said. You're like him very much. The queen took a deep breath. She was glad no one except her faithful old Mary was here to see what was going on. Very well, she said. You may call your giant. No, wait a moment. Mary, pull yourself together and give me my dressing gown and slippers. The maid did as she was told. The queen got out of bed and put on a pale pink dressing gown and slippers. Okay, you may call now, the queen said. Sophie turned her head towards the garden and called out, BFG, Her Majesty the Queen would like to see you. The queen crossed over to the window and stood beside Sophie. Come down off that ledge, she said. You're going to fall backwards any moment. Sophie jumped down into the room and stood beside the queen at the open window. Mary, the maid, stood behind them. Her hands were now planted firmly on her hips, and there was a look on her face which seemed to say, I want no part of this fiasco. I don't see any giant, the queen said. Please wait, Sophie said. Shall I take her away now, Mum? The maid said. Take her downstairs and give her some breakfast, the queen said. Just then, there was a rustle in the bushes beside the lake. Then, out he came. 24 feet tall, wearing his black cloak with the grace of a nobleman, still carrying his long trumpet in one hand, he strode magnificently towards the palace lawn, towards the window. The maid screamed. The queen gasped. Sophie waved. The BFG took his time. He was very dignified in his approach. When he was close to the window where the 3 of them were standing, he stopped and made a slow, graceful bow. His head, after he had straightened up again, was almost exactly level with the watchers at the window. Your Majesty, he said, I is your humbug servant. He bowed again. There's a Penny. Hi, hon. Hey, welcome, Penny. Pen was here. I think it's the first time you've caught me alive. I hope you'll stick around. Okay, Your Majesty. Yeah, considering she was meeting a giant for the first time in her life, the queen remained astonishingly self-composed. We are very pleased to meet you, she said. Down below, a gardener was coming across the lawn with a wheelbarrow. He caught sight of the BFG's legs over to his left. His gaze traveled slowly upwards along the entire height of the enormous body. He gripped the handles of the wheelbarrow. He swayed. Yes, my first time. Well, I'm glad to see you. Woohoo! Give me a shout out. Penny! Shout out to Penny! Boop, boop! He swayed. He tottered. Then he keeled over on the grass in a dead faint. Nobody noticed him. Oh, Magister! Cried the BFG. Oh, Queen! Oh, Monarcher! Oh, Golden Sovereign! Oh, ruler of straight lines! Oh, Sultana! Oh, I come here with my little friend Sophie to give you a... The BFG hesitated, searching for the word. To give me what? The Queen said. Assistance, the BFG said, beaming. The Queen looked puzzled. He sometimes speaks a bit funny, Your Majesty, Sophie said. He never went to school. Then we must send him to school, the Queen said. We have some very good schools in this country. I should be delighted to hear them, the Queen said. He says, I have some great secrets to tell you, your Magister, the BFG said. Oh, I should be delighted to hear them, the Queen said, but not in my dressing gown. Shall you wish to get dressed, Mum? The maid said. Have either of you had breakfast? The maid said. Oh, could we? Sophie said. Oh, please. I haven't eaten a thing since yesterday. I was about to have mine, the Queen said, but Mary dropped it. The maid gulped. I imagine we have more food in the palace, the Queen said, speaking to the BFG. Perhaps you and your little friend would care to join me. Will it be repulsant snozcumbers, Magister? The BFG asked. Will it be what? The Queen said. Stinky snozcumbers, the BFG said. What is he talking about? The Queen said. It sounds like a rude word to me. She turned to the maid and said, Mary, ask them to serve breakfast for 3 in the, well, I think it had better be the ballroom. This has the highest ceiling. To the BFG, she said, I'm afraid you will have to go through the door on your hands and knees. I shall send someone to show you the way. The BFG reached up and lifted Sophie out of the window. You and I is leaving Her Magister alone to get dressed, he said. No, leave the little girl with me, she said. We'll have to find something for her to put on. But she can't have breakfast in her nightie. The BFG returned Sophie to the bedroom. Can we have sausages, Your Majesty? Sophie said. And bacon and fried eggs? I think that can be arranged, the Queen answered, smiling. Just you wait till you taste it, Sophie said to the BFG. No more snozcumbers from now on. And that's it. Well, that's the end for tonight. I dog-eared it because that was exactly a half hour. It's 8:16. That's not too bad. 8:15. I started at 22. So there you have it. We are probably getting to the last leg of this, to be honest with you. 163, 73, 83. Oh, yeah, for sure. Only one more to go, to be honest. Version in the house. Woohoo! She just popped her cherry. Aunty Andrew's reading quarter cherry. I know, that sounds so wrong. But yeah, I just realized. Thanks, Barbara. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I did my very best queen that I could. I actually been watching The Crown the past couple of nights, so I actually had a really... it never does get old. Well, it's not getting old for me. It's the first time I actually read it, but I really love it. It's a beautiful tale. I was saying, I was watching The Queen and The Crown. Actually, this last season of The Crown, anybody who loved Lady Di and like me, I was like up like this watching the wedding at like 7 in the morning. This season is amazing because it's all about all that stuff. And Maggie Thatcher, fucking bitch. Anyway, yeah, it's really, 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 really good. So I highly recommend that. Thank you so much for joining me. I am going to cut it loose because I've got a massive headache. I'm so hungry. It's been a big day. Thanks. Hey, Phil, thanks for hanging out for so long. I'm always so impressed when someone it goes right through the whole thing. Not because they get bored. I mean, obviously they don't get bored. I'm amazing. But it's usually you have to go off and feed somebody or your kid's pulling at your leg or whatever. So thank you very much for sticking around. Penny, I'm so glad you were able to join. I know you're probably gone now, but thank you. Thank you all. I love you very, very much. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And I will see you on... Oh, Monday. Yeah, here's the thing. Mondays are getting really tough for me because I do a lot of showings on Mondays and stuff. Like contractually, I'm wrapping things up that I've pulled together over the weekend. So if not Monday, then Tuesday. Just be prepared because it might change on the fly from Monday to Tuesday. Okay? Mwah. Good night. Have a wonderful evening.